Hello, it's Sunday, which means it's a Normal Island special, Normal Island The Debrief, a usually three-way panel show looking at the political stories this week. I would be joined by both Turn Left contributors Lewis Aaron and Callum Taylor, but Callum Taylor cannot make it tonight, so it will be myself and Lewis. My name is Curtis Daly, and I'll be your host tonight. To start off, London saw 15,000 Tommy Robinson supporters march throughout the city in one of the largest far-right rallies we have seen for years. Amid a sea of England and Union Jack flags, Tommy Robinson supporters listened to speeches attacking immigration and promoting patriotism. He received a loud cheer in Trafalgar Square when he asked the crowd how many of them voted for reform at the general election. He revealed that he had asked Nigel Farage to speak at the protest, but said the reform leader had told him he couldn't make it. Now, it has been reported that 9 arrests were made. However, the march was met with resistance and counter-protests to demonstrate against Tommy Robinson and his supporters. A counter-protest by Stand Up to Racism and former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project also took place in London. At the anti-racist counter-protest nearby, Jeremy Corbyn gave a speech and demonstrators held placards reading, "No to racism, no to hatred," and chanted, "We won't be silent." Now, a video has also gone round on social media of children chanting Allahu Akbar or Allah, Allah, who the fuck is Allah? Now, obviously, the faces were blurred since, they're still kids. Now, since the march, Tommy Robinson has been arrested on anti-terrorism charges. Tommy Robinson has been arrested under anti-terror laws, according to his supporters, after a protest at which a film was allegedly screened in contempt of court. A complaint was later made over a film which was allegedly shown to the crowd in breach of a High Court order, with police saying officers were making further inquiries. It is not clear whether the arrest is related to the film that focuses on the case of Jamal Hijazi, a schoolboy who was assaulted at Almondbury Community School in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire in October 2018. Robinson was later ordered to pay £100,000 to the Syrian boy after he was sued for making defamatory comments about him. Jamal said Robinson's comments led to him facing death threats and extremist agitation. Now, I guess the confusion here is that Robinson was arrested over anti-terror laws, but articles are suggesting it was because the film is in contempt of court, which, wouldn't be the first time for him. Although the Mirror at the end they're saying it could be because the film could have included a libelous claim about Jamal Hijazi. Now, onto our next headline. Right-wingers have been very upset over the Paris Olympic ceremony in which the organisers have been forced to apologise to Christians. The organising committee of Paris 2024 has apologised to Catholics and other Christian groups who were outraged by a scene during the opening ceremony that evokes Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper painting with drag queens, a transgender model and a singer made up as the Greek god of wine. The parody of the biblical scene performed against the backdrop of the River Seine was intended to interpret Dionysus and raise awareness of the absurdity of violence between human beings. But the committee was forced to apologise after the performance caused outrage among Catholics, Christian groups and conservative politicians around the world. It seems once again conservatives are acting like snowflakes. However, according to opening ceremony choreographer Thomas Jolly, the ceremony wasn't even doing a parody of The Last Supper. Jolly also denied taking inspiration from The Last Supper in his nearly 4-hour production, which took place under driving rain along the River Seine. The idea was to do a big pagan party linked to the gods of Olympus. So it seems people have mistaken the performance depicting The Last Supper, so the outrage is literally over nothing. Now, more footage has been released in regards to the Manchester airport incident that saw a police officer stamp on a suspect's head.
What was leading up to that particular moment. So from the footage that you're seeing now, you can see two female officers and one male officer who approach an individual, and you can see it becomes very chaotic, very aggressive, and there you can see a female police officer right there is punched in the face, and there is another female officer on the ground. That individual then takes the police officer in a headlock, and you can just see.
Now, in that footage, it looks like one of the officers actually threw the first punch, which led to the outburst of violence. Now, some people have been using this as justification for what the officer did, as officers had been assaulted beforehand. Now, on to the last story. Higher water bills may be coming our way. Environmental Secretary Steve Reed proudly announced they are backing regulator Ofwat, who will make sure that water companies will be investing $88 billion. He says that this will clean up our waters. He then said that companies will be on special notice and may face criminal charges, and he banned on bonuses if they don't meet standards. However, this isn't the good news that is being portrayed by the government. Steve Reed shared a newspaper article on his Twitter account. The Labour government will secure the biggest ever investment to fix our broken water system, boosting economic growth and creating thousands of jobs across the country as we clean up our polluted waterways. Now, the newspaper clipping shows headlines that clean water is coming. But what Reeves didn't realise, that within the image he shared is where the money is going to come from. The government is backing plans by the regulator Ofwat for an $88 billion spending package by water utilities between 2025 and 2030, initially funded by the city or through borrowing, and then recovered through higher customer bills. Yes, that's right. Private companies who make a profit off providing natural resources to us, I say providing, don't give out for the goodness of their heart. They want a return on investment, and one of the ways they're going to do that is to charge us more. Now, the source of those article images was from the Daily Mail. So water bills are likely to rise under this government. Let's bring Lewis in. Look, let's start off with what we saw in London. 15,000 far-right supporters took to the streets in the name of patriotism. Are these activists supporting patriotism?
Oh, you know what? I absolutely support them all the way. They've got a great message, very consistent. They know exactly what they're marching for, and we should all get behind them. No, it's an absolute joke. In the weeks leading up to the Tommy March, as it was coined, I spoke to loads of Tommy supporters, people who were going, and spoke to people after that they went. Nobody really knows actually what they were going for. I heard it was obviously an anti-immigration march. I heard it was a march against a two-tier policing system. I heard it was just a march against the government, a march against the ECHR. Like, they don't really know why they're there. It's just these idiots just making a mockery of themselves. And they did the same thing that they did at the other march a few months ago, where it was fact checked on factcheck.org. Someone claimed there was like 1 million people there, and it was one of the biggest marches in history. And again, it just really wasn't. Again, after speaking to people who went to the march yesterday online, they were like, this idea of oh god, only if you could truly understand how many people were there. It was 15,000. It's just that when you're in a crowd of people and you look around and the street looks full, for some reason these people think that it must be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, when it's not. It was 15,000. They don't know what they're marching for. They don't know what they were there. They don't have a message. And it was just a big racist march.
I mean, 15,000 is still quite significant in terms of the far-right marching, though. Of course, when it comes to any other marches, when it comes to anti-racist march, they absolutely smash that number to pieces. But it's still concerning. And when we look at, for example, the ceasefire marches, we hear from the right, it's a hate march. But there's clear political goals they've got. They want a ceasefire. They want to end the occupation. We know what they're marching for. But when you see these types of I call them far-right marches, what is it that they actually want? Now, I can hear someone saying to me right now, oh, you lefties, think everything's racist. They're standing up for a country, but what's their political goal?
I still don't really think that they have one, because when the march was going on, I was on TikTok because I spend way too much time just doom scrolling on TikTok. I must have come across an estimation of about 20 to 30 different lives over the space of 2 hours. Most of the time, they were just screaming Tommy, 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 Tommy. Because it's more like cultish. It's almost like MAGA behavior in a way, right? It's them just screaming somebody's name. They're there for the name of a person. And again, I still don't really actually know what they want. I think they're just angry, and they don't know really what they're angry about. I genuinely can't really pin it to anything. I think ultimately, obviously, it just generally comes down to the idea that everything that's wrong with this country is purely because of immigration, and that there's a culture change, and undertones of the Great Replacement theory type of stuff, where groups of people are coming in to replace us and change our culture. They don't know really what they're angry at, and which is unfortunate for me, right? Because imagine if these 15,000 people actually took their energy and actually directed it towards the systems that have failed this country, and organized that way to actually attack them. And this isn't the argument that I believe in, but it's the argument that I've been presented to some people, is that if we look at the data of people who've come to this country just in the last year, right, it's about 300,000 to 400,000 student visas. Now, I don't have anything against those people coming here, but I will pose the argument: if the government would have never introduced fees, or even obviously tripled them back in, was it 2010, 2011, then they wouldn't rely on 400,000 people having to come to this country just to keep the universities going. So actually, if you would have maybe spent more time marching against that, you could have actually turn around and say, we stopped hundreds of thousands of people coming into this country. When it comes to the NHS, march for the NHS, we know that we have to bring people into this country because so many doctors and nurses are leaving, because we can't literally find people to do these jobs, so we have to bring them in. And I'm not against that at all, but that's a logical argument that you could think about. If you know that the NHS is an absolute mess, and we're having to bring in lots of people, not just for that industry, for lots of industries, for teachers. I listened to an interview a few weeks ago of a guy who's in charge of an academy somewhere in the West Midlands, and they're having to hire teachers from Jamaica because they just simply cannot find them. So maybe if they actually spent more time marching for the NHS, marching for teachers, marching for better housing, then actually, in theory, that could actually reduce immigration. It's all of it's nonsensical. But when you pose this argument to them, they're just like, oh, Tommy.
Well, I mean, I actually want to touch upon the immigration argument you've just made there in terms of reducing immigration. But before we get onto that, I mean, what does patriotism actually mean? Now, if you ask me, I mean, I would say I'm quite patriotic. I mean, patriotic in that I care about people in this country. I want to see an end to homelessness. I want to see the housing crisis fixed. I want to see public services working properly. I want to see people getting access to healthcare. To me, that's what patriotism is. And also, patriotism is also criticising your own government, because I want to see improvements in this country, which is why, yes, I will criticise the government. But when these people talk about patriotism, I mean, it's not patriotism. When they're angry, right, about culture, and it's, in essence, specifically with Tommy Robinson, it's Muslims. Now, how does attacking another community make you patriotic? How does it make people in this country's lives better? Who, by the way, many British people who were born here are Muslim. Obviously, for these people, essentially, is white supremacy. They don't think you have a right to be here if you're not white. They'll say they won't, by the way. Say, oh, I'm not racist. No, I don't believe that. But let's be honest, if you're going to go on a march, you're willing to go on a march to support Tommy Robinson, I would bet a lot of these people have some disgusting racist opinions. But, I mean, I want to talk to me about patriotism. These people say they care about the country, but what is this country consisted of? People. And I never hear Tommy Robinson talk about people's material conditions, about workers' rights, about poverty, about inequality. So he's not a patriot, is he?
Absolutely not. And I want to touch on 2 points of patriotism, because we've got everyone's got their own version of patriotism. I love, it's controversial. I love this country's food. I love the country's music. I love our positive contributions to the world. I love that we stepped up and helped Ukrainians out when Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm happy that we're doing that. That makes me feel patriotic that we're standing up against Russia. But the type of patriotism that they claim to have, their actions are actually leading to the exact opposite. So if we want to talk about the things that they care about the most when it comes to, like, soldiers, veterans, World War I, World War II, their actions are actually like a direct opposite of what they should be doing. So stay with me for this one for a second. So World War II. What led to that? Very simply, was obviously nationalism. And then what came after that? A very famous quote from lovely Winston Churchill is that, I don't know the exact quote, but basically he wanted a United States of Europe because he thought like bringing us all together and creating all of these systems was the only thing that could fight against nationalism. And that's what he said in a famous speech in Switzerland in like 1940 something. I can't remember the exact dates. And I feel like it's almost unpatriotic to, I don't want to give Winston any credit because he's very controversial. But the one good thing that he did is that he survived through that time. He led the country through this time. And so did many other leaders, soldiers, generals, political leaders across the world. And then they all came together after World War II and said, look at all these people who've died. Look at all the soldiers' lives lost. Look at all the civilians' lives lost. What we did to Germany as well, the way we kill civilians as well in Germany was terrible. And we came up with systems, everything from the ECHR to the Geneva Conventions to what is now the ICC to the ICJ. All of these systems we came up with to prevent a fascist nationalist rise to ever rise again, to protect people and their human rights. And now they're literally following the footsteps of what originally led to the system being created because they think they're in danger because of another group of people. This is almost like history mirroring itself, right? And they also often forget that somewhere in the region, the numbers are disputed, but somewhere in the region of 1 million Muslims fought on our side in World War II, because when India was still whole before the partition, and we didn't draft people from India, they volunteered. Obviously, people on our side volunteered too, but we had to draft. We went to India and was like, we need people. Who's going to step up? And over 1 million Muslims volunteered. And people forget that. And it's very, very frustrating. So for me, patriotism is tied to those systems because despite the faults of some of the leaders at that time, I will take away their wisdom because they went through it and they survived it and they tried to set up a system to prevent it. And right now, a far-right, fascist, nationalistic group of people are trying to undo those systems to target another group of people. That's why we need them in place.
Now, I mean, I said we're going to talk about immigration. There is a difference between talking about tackling immigration levels than what we're seeing on the streets. I know some people say, well, I get lumped a racist when I'm only concerned about immigration. I don't think people are racist if they're talking about immigration levels. But you brought up a really good point, which is, and it's not tied to far-right politics, it's more of the centre-right politics, but I think it all comes under a very similar umbrella because people can move around within these political labels. But the economic system we have of global capitalism, in essence, relies on a high amount of immigration. Now, if you've got reform, for example, saying we need net zero on immigration, which is economically calamitous, right? If you truly wanted to drastically bring down immigration, then you're going to have to change this economic system. This economic system, which is for decades has essentially been all about trade, all about free trade across borders. Well, then you can't then have low amounts of immigration. I mean, we've lost our industrial policy. We don't build anything anymore. And everything is relied on capital going to and from whether it's the EU, whether it's across the world. And that discussion is never had. No one wants to address the economic system behind it. You cannot have a global capitalist system on low immigration. You need a state-led industrial policy. And guess who the people champion that? Is it the right? No, it's the left. The left talk about how Thatcherism sold everything off, either privatised everything or we changed essentially to a service economy. But we don't build anything anymore. Now we're relying on places like China, for example. Now, to me, again, to bring back to patriotism, if you want, you could say, well, how about we start, putting things into public ownership so we own it as a country? How about we start building stuff here in this country rather than shipping jobs abroad, and we take care of our own in that way? And of course, we can have an immigration policy separate to that. But right now, our economic policies that's underpinning this system right, relies on high amounts of immigration. And yet you've got politicians from all political parties, whether it's the Labour Party, whether it's the Conservative Party, whether it's Reform, they talk about the need to reduce immigration, but they won't talk about capitalism, will they?
No, they won't at all. They fundamentally just do not understand the system and how it works. And obviously, we'd love to see the system changed in many ways. But right now, this is the one that we have. And, when we talk about this idea, obviously, some people would go as far and say, just close the borders, which obviously would be ridiculous. And then even if you want to have the argument of like reducing immigration, again, it's not even about like the goal shouldn't be reduce immigration in this current system. The goal should be tackling the systems that ultimately have failed, that lead us to relying on immigration. But the goal shouldn't even be reducing immigration. The goal should just simply be, we need to fix these systems. And then naturally, the amount of immigration would just simply go down. But we'd still obviously have to rely on it in still so many ways. We don't have a replacement rate through birth. That's just a simple fact. We just don't have it. I don't know what it is, like 1.6 or something like that. I don't know the exact number. And continuing on that, even if we manage to come up with this perfect system where all these systems are fine, when it's housing, whether it's housing, what was it, NHS, all these type of things, we still rely on things like people from slightly poorer countries just to come over and pick our fruit, because people simply do not want to do those jobs. So tell me what is a great policy that we can come up with where people are going to be incentivized to do a job they don't want to do? Because ultimately it would be in the capitalist system, it has to be competitive. You have to pay them more money. And then suddenly everybody's price of food goes up as well. And then it just creates another problem. Obviously the system is sticky. It just, anytime you affect one part of the system, it messes up with another. But ultimately, they don't care. They just simply don't care. It's ideology before practicality. They don't care. And then when you explain these things to them, people will just say, oh, what about the unemployed people out there? And it's like, even if you manage to somehow come up with a policy which utilize those people, which would have to be a brutal system, right? You can't just simply reactivate inactive people immediately and overnight. The only way to do it would be brutally. And even if we did, the numbers still don't add up. We have an aging population, regardless of whatever utopian policy that we came up with right now to fix everything in our system. At the end of the day, it still wouldn't be enough. We have an aging population who is continuing to grow. We have massive skill shortages across multiple sectors. We don't even have enough people in the military right now. It's dangerously low. And none of these systems seem to be working. And they all currently still rely on mass immigration as well. So anyone, please feel free to tell me how reducing immigration would help. It would not. It would only harm us. And it's just completely unpatriotic to even go against these systems anyway, because part of our history is obviously building up these systems which relies on people having somewhere to go when they need it. Someone posed the argument to me yesterday, they go back to, they're only economic migrants. And it's like, no, they're not. Obviously, they're coming here for a better life, but they're not just coming here for money. If you actually look at the poorest countries in the world, it's not those people who are coming here. Obviously, they still come from very poor countries. But if you actually look at the numbers, most of them are coming from countries that we've previously destabilized, right? Like, think about the Middle East, right? Iraq, Afghanistan. They've got weapons of mass destruction. Because of that destabilization, there's a direct link between people from Afghanistan coming here in mass amounts because we fucked up their regions so much. It's not the poorest countries in the world who are coming here. If the argument was poor people come here, it's just simply not true, because the numbers don't add up. It's people who come from countries that we've absolutely just fucked with.
Now, Tommy Robinson even said, to link the march to reform, because he quite literally said it himself, how many people are reform voters, and a lot of them cheered. Now, not every person who voted for reform, millions of people vote reform, are on the far right. I think it would be ludicrous to claim that. Not everyone who votes reform is a racist. I also think that's ludicrous to claim that. But there's a section of the far right who are backing reform because they clearly see reform as a political vehicle to get their own ends. So, I mean, what do you think in the next election? Let's look at the next election, right? How much of an issue, or how prominent could reform be if Keir Starmer doesn't address the issues that we are desperately facing? And we've got issues with our water being polluted with shit, which we'll get onto later. Inequality is rising. People are getting poorer. None of these things are being addressed by the political establishment. And Starmer, who's very much the political establishment, if he doesn't address these big questions over us, then you're going to see surely more marches like these and more support for reform.
Well, just to talk about reform for 1 second, if you actually look at their 5 seats that they won, they are all coastal towns who have been absolutely left behind by all the governments of the past. Coastal towns have struggled for decades, unless you're somewhere like Brighton or something like that, it's different. But most smaller coastal towns have massively struggled over the last few decades because they just had a complete lack of infrastructure. But the 5 reform seats are demographically between 90 to 95% white British. They are very unaffected by migration. So for some reason, when they wake up in the morning, they look around and they see, the state of their coastal towns, and they, for some reason, have been convinced that that's the fault of migrants who don't live there. It's absolutely wild. But again, there are more towns out there, more places, and I do stick to the word towns because I just don't think we're ever going to see somebody in like a city area necessarily voting for reform anytime soon in terms of winning a seat. Yeah, maybe if Keir Starmer just doesn't do a good job over the next few years, I think they could still win maybe a few more seats. They came second in, what was it, like 90 something seats, but when you actually look at the data, it wasn't like they came massively close even when they came second place, and they only came second place in some because people were just obviously doing a protest vote against the Conservatives. The gap was still pretty massive because the vote was still so split on the right that a lot of those seats where they came, the 90 something seats where they came second, most of them are like thousands and thousands and thousands of votes away from coming anywhere near first place. So it's not even that marginal. Again, I mentioned this to you earlier when I was talking to you about like what happened in France, right, where Macron came in and he took the centre because the left have failed, the right have failed. And is it possible that because Keir Starmer's come in and took the centre, because the left have failed and the right have failed, that if he then fails, could we go in the same direction of France, where the right, the far right, almost very marginally just almost came into power because Macron's election that he called? It could happen, but all we can do is hope for the best. And despite the fact that we're going to continue to hold the Labour government accountable, we still wish them the best. We want them to succeed, not just for the country, but also to keep the far right away at bay. And ultimately, if they fail, it's on Labour's back. It's on their back, and it's their fault, and it's their responsibility. But I don't think even in the next election, even if something really, really drastic happens, I can't imagine them going from 5 to opposition or 5 to majority. It just, unless a massive, absolutely, unprecedented, the favorite word of the last 10 years actually happened, then yeah, maybe, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Let's move on. Now, the left have often been called snowflakes and easily offended, but I think once again we are seeing another example of projection. Conservative politicians, right-wing commentators are really upset over a bit of art. So what do you make of the Olympic ceremony in Paris, the part that caused controversy, and the outrage from the right?
Oh, they're such snowflakes, aren't they? Just such snowflakes. It's so funny because they will just eat up anything that they're told, right? That depiction of the Last Supper with Jesus, right, where it's like a bunch of people on a table, that type of painting has been done so many times. And also, as well, as you mentioned earlier, and I'm sorry, Curtis, I'm going to have to correct you on your pronunciation because I think somebody mentioned it in the comments, but it's Dionysus, the god of wine. Sorry to correct you there. But yeah, so if actually what happened is the photo that went viral around the drag queens and the person who had a little crown on their head, I get like the similarity to the photo of the Last Supper if you compare it directly to that. But in reality, if you would have watched the video for 10 more seconds, you would have actually seen that the camera pans away and there is a depiction of a Greek person called, is it Bacchus, I think they're called? I don't know. Anyone who's Greek mythology knowledgeable, tell me in the comments what the name of that person is. The blue guy. It was a picture. It was a representation of Dionysus at the Feast of Dionysus, I think it was called. And again, it's just how easy the right can take something out of context just for their own rage bait, because this is how they survive. This is the only way they can survive. They have nothing else good to talk about right now than just continuing the culture wars. They have to create this. And what's also weird as well, yes, the Olympics is a global competition that, it gets a lot of viewers. I think everybody enjoys at least something in the Olympics, whether it's the swimming or the gymnastics, whatever. But I'm seeing an increase because of this echo chamber that's created online. People are staying in silos now. We've gone from, I don't know, perhaps 10 years ago where people would have outrage mostly for stories that just happened in this country. But because people have been put into these silos, that they're getting fed stories from every single country in the world now. So it's like the pickings are wider.
I mean, we even got Richard Tice commenting on this, saying it's an outrage to Christians. It feels very much like an American culture war that's being imported to the UK. And like, what is so offensive about this? I mean, again, like I've been saying this for years, that the right wingers who have always accused the left being snowflakes, crybabies, it has always been projection, because they cry about the most unimportant things. This is just a ceremony. That's it. I mean, I'm outraged at ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza. I'm outraged at the amount of homelessness there are in this country, even though we're one of the fifth richest nation in the world. These are the things, these material things outrage me. But for conservatives, it's something that didn't even depict the Last Supper. It just looked like it. And they've made an entire culture war on it.
Yeah, as well. I was talking with Cog as well last night, who works on the show, and he was. We were having a little debate with some people, and they were talking about how this horse with a white skeleton on it or something was like a depiction of death or something like that, and this is how the right are also interpreting it as well. And Cog was just like, it literally could be Gandalf on his horse in the Lord of the Rings. Like, if you actually put 100 people in a separate room and ask them to watch the Olympic ceremony, they'd all come away with potential different interpretations of it. It's just that. What happens is, obviously, these people, GB News, whoever else, just sit in a room, right? They sit in a room and think, how can we make this into outrage? How can we make this into a culture war story, an anti-woke story? What can we do? Because they have to keep feeding people that. And it's just a joke. Even there was multiple drag queens involved in this competition, if there would have even been one, there still would have been outrage. That's the point that we're out now, because more increasingly on the right, they're associating all LGBTQ with, being a groomer, even to the point where I follow a trans lawyer in Florida. Her name's Kristen B. I would recommend going to follow her. She got so fed up with this idea from the Christian right in America of being drag queens and trans people being groomers and over-sexualized and whatever else, is that for over the space of a year, she tracked every single case of anything to do with a child being sexually assaulted anywhere in America. And then because in America, with their beautiful justice system, you get to know everything about the person who is the defendant, including like their job and everything. You get access to a lot of details. She tracked their jobs. And if I remember correctly, it was around 11% of all cases were people who were in what she referred to as the religious industry. And again, this idea of like trying to over-sexualize drag queens, when some of them are very sexual. Paul O'Grady, massively sexual. Yeah, he dropped loads of jokes, but when he was doing his daytime TV show, he was perfectly fine. Like, some of them could be sexual, some of them can be very child-friendly. But for some reason, now drag queens are just being completely attacked.
Yeah, but I want to ask you...
Sorry, I'm ranting now. Ranting.
Well, I want to ask you about this particular image, what's got people so upset, because the idea that it's offensive to Christians, well, I mean, this image, again, it wasn't depicted on the Last Supper, but people thought it was, right? But over the years, we've seen different depictions of it. I mean, The Simpsons did it. Battlestar Galactica, I mean, I've never watched the show, but I've seen the image.
Absolutely love that show.
I've heard it's a great show. It's one for the watch, but we've seen so many different depictions of this Last Supper image. So why specifically this? I mean, for me, it's when you look at the imagery, it's clearly because there's queer people in there. There's someone who's overweight or obese, someone who a few people who are visibly queer, and people think, well, this is clearly degeneracy. And that's why it's offensive to them. If they're watching The Simpsons and they just see the characters in this position, doesn't matter. If they see the characters from Battlestar Galactica or video games do it, it doesn't matter. But suddenly, because there is there's a trans person in there, it's social degeneracy, and that's why they find it offensive. So it's not really offensive against their religion. It's not really offensive against historical paintings. It's because they just don't like, let's be honest, queer people. Sorry, yeah. I mean, if you have that position, people moaning about they don't like it when we talk about this, just come out with your full chest. Just say, I don't like queer people. Just say it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anything that can cause outrage, they'll jump onto it. And usually how these things start, it just takes one person in the ecosystem for somebody to point it out, and then people will just run with it. It's so frustrating as well, because The Last Supper was famously painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Obviously, there's many depictions of it, who many historians have also claimed that he was probably gay, because there was so many confirmed stories of him having relationships with men, which is also quite ironic, because again, he's got some of the most famous Christian art in the world.
He's about to be cancelled.
Cancelled. Let's cancel Da Vinci. But yeah, it's continuing to be frustrating, because they'll find anything like this. The fact that a drag queen is firstly not inherently sexual, and also on top of that, even if we want to let's go after the Greek gods. They were incredibly sexual. They were incredibly incestuous. We could make an argument that the Greek gods should be in the Olympics in any way, because it's a big incestuous family. It's just a complete joke. They will rage over absolutely anything. And inherently, queer people exist in society, and we will continue to exist. I am a gay man. I'm very happy and I'm very proud. And people need to stop sexualizing our identities, because they are not inherently sexual, whether you're a drag queen, a gay person, or a trans person in any way. And just back the fuck off. Get out of your silos. Get off Twitter. Say fuck off to your TikTok algorithm, which is just feeding you hate, and just step out into the real world and go speak to a drag queen. Go to one of the story time reading things, which, by the way, don't actually happen in schools, but your Twitter feed will tell you it does. Just go and speak to these people. They exist online in person spaces. I can guarantee the second you sit down with any of them for 10 minutes, you will see they're very lovely people. And of course, occasionally, just like anyone else in the population, there will be the odd weirdo.
No, I mean, look, people have their right to complain about this and be upset about it. That's absolutely fine. But to me, it's more the inconsistency here. I mean, Rachel Atwood, one of our regular viewers, pointed out that if you're going to complain about the Paris Olympics, focus on all the unhoused people getting kicked out of their camps to build single-use stadiums. That's a really big thing to get outraged at. I mean, a beautiful spectacle from our Olympic Games. I mean, the 2012 ceremony I thought was fantastic, and I've not actually watched the full one, if I'm honest, but I'm sure it was a beautiful spectacle, but people being kicked out of their homes for it. That's something to be outraged about, but I don't see it from the political right. I would be far more charitable to them if they were at least consistent. Said, do you know what? I'm a very offended person. These things offend me, but also seeing people in drag offends me. I'll be like, okay, you're just an offended person, but at least you're consistent. But we don't see anger when there's so many real issues happening in the world. But it has to be these sorts of things. And a lot of it is manufactured. It's manufactured for a reason to distract you from the real issues. I mean, to me, a real issue is the fact that we have more billionaires than ever. We're going to have the first trillionaire, whilst there are people who are on food stamps in the US, people on benefits over here, people aren't housed properly, people can't get access to the basic necessities. Keep people getting angry at these bullshit culture wars, and that's going to continue to happen. I like to see these people outraged about it, but they're not. But, I mean, we'll leave it there on that particular topic. I want to talk about the Manchester incident. Now, there's been more footage that's been revealed of what happened at the airports, as we showed earlier. And some people have been using this footage as more justification for what the officer did, which is to stamp on one of the suspects' heads. Now, if you ask me, there's no further context you can add to justify it. But this extra footage, I mean, it looks like to me that one of the officers landed the first punch. I mean, what do you make of this? And also, what do you make of those who think, well, do you know what? They were violent thugs, clearly, so the officers did the right thing.
Yeah, it goes back to the same conversation of, even though somebody has done something wrong, whether they've been violent or whether they've shoplifted, is that still under the law, everybody needs to be treated equally and fairly. And obviously, even still at that point, they are still innocent because they haven't been found guilty. And it is not the police's job in any way to inflict punishment on anyone. It is their job to enforce the law and to maintain order. And obviously, they didn't do any of those things because that guy broke the law and he inflamed the situation. If you go back to the first video, even to this video, it doesn't look like the officer was very suited to be in one of those situations. And I'm sure, again, there are many amazing police officers out there who are fantastic at de-escalating. They know know exactly how to follow their training. They know how to pin somebody to the floor if they need to and restrain them. But obviously some people don't. And this guy went too far. It does not matter who you are arresting. And there's loads of situations as well where people have mental health issues, right? Where this happened with George Floyd as well. He had mental health issues. People could be alcoholics. People could be under the influence of drugs as well. And, you know, they could be I specifically want to go back to the disability issue, because there has been a few cases like this as well, where somebody has appeared dangerous because in actual fact they're just simply disabled, and the police have had to use force against them. And there's been a few cases where it's come out they've used too much force, because obviously I think most people obviously usually when they're arrested they don't necessarily resist, but if you try and arrest a person who's on top of that got mental health issues, of course they're going to resist. But again, that person should be, as always, be treated fairly and equally under the law. Any police officer who inflicts damage like this on a person should not be working the job. And in actual fact, they should face charges, which I believe it's not officially been announced, but it's been said that he could be facing charges. It's frustrating because, again, the issue has been racialized. Not necessarily talking about how the police officer might have acted like that because of the person of the color skin, but just the issue itself of police brutality, that people are actually saying this is justified because of what he did. And I just don't think people would be saying that, or as many people perhaps might not be saying that if this person was a white man or a white woman. Yeah, he's obviously not a great guy, the person who got kicked. He assaulted somebody. Doesn't seem like a great guy on camera either. But at the end of the day, nobody deserves that. I don't care what anybody says, whether you're arresting a murderer or anything like that. That person should be brought equally and fairly under the justice system and treated fairly. I do not want to live in a state or a country anywhere in the world where the police can use that type of force against anyone.
But I mean, to me, it's not even about whether he deserved it or not. I mean, we don't know the full facts. Maybe the guy absolutely deserved it. It's not the role of the police to be judge, jury, and executioner. It's the role of the courts to decide the punishment. And I find this very funny from, again, conservatives who've always typically been in favour of the rule of law, now denigrating a lot of their upheld traditions. I mean, Lee Anderson, for example, he's there saying that the officer should get a medal. So what he's saying is you want carte blanche for the police to do whatever they like, which is obviously a slippery slope. I don't want to live in a police state. All right, I want maximum freedom, which again, by the way, freedom is supposed to be a strong political principle of the political right, which again, they've never supported. Well, I like freedom, and I would like the idea that the police aren't, you know, just battering people left, right, and centre. We have these institutions to make sure that people are held to account. But what do we want? Some lawless state? And that's quite funny when we hear conservatives. Again, seemingly, I mean, Richard Tice, it was very performative from Richard Tice, where he wrote a letter to Yvette Cooper saying, oh, well, are you going to make sure that these thugs are prosecuted? And it's like, well, they're going to be prosecuted. So it was performance in this. It was a load of rubbish. It's going to happen anyway, but do we want better policing? Yes. Do we want a society where we have free and fair laws? Yes. I mean, it's not controversial, I don't think, but to so many people it is, and I think it's an appeal to someone's emotion. You know, I've had this discussion so many times where people say to me, "Oh, do you know what? I mean, if this happened to one of your friends or family, how would you feel?" I'm like, yeah, I want to batter him too. If that guy punched one of my family, I want to punch him back too. But it's not about what I want. It's about what our police system should do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd pose this question to anyone, right? If some people who are saying he deserved this because it's a man assaulting somebody else. So if a woman was in a bar and she just walked up to another woman and then punched her and assaulted her, are you saying that a police officer should be able to come into that bar, drag that one down to the floor and kick her in the back of the head? Most people would probably answer no to that question. And the reason for that is to do with the fact that obviously it's a man, it's a brown man, and he's a Muslim as well. That's why people are going on this idea of like, he deserved that. I don't think necessarily it's completely racialized. I think there are just people out there who'd be like, yeah, anybody deserves a kick in the head for that. And yeah, the police can get away with it. I do think it's been heavily racialized. And I don't think anybody would condone that in the situation that I just presented. Can we imagine if that happened? What would be the story right now if a if a woman got kicked in the head by the back of a female police officer because she punched somebody else, it would be a completely different story. This is just hate-driven stuff again. And again, this was part of actually the protest as well. There were people holding signs about this. Tommy was tweeting about it constantly. Farage as well, obviously, and just all that far-right group of people, because they're racializing every incident in this country which involves a non-white person.
But it's also quite interesting that a lot of people are trying to say this is some sort of left-wing response, but it's really, really not. I mean, even to hark back to Churchill, and Churchill was in favour of, I mean, he didn't always adhere to it himself, but rule of law. I mean, he helped the institution, like the ECHR, it was part of that process. So and again, I link that to conservatism. One of the principles of conservatism was rule of law. So when we're arguing that the police officer shouldn't have stamped on someone's head, again, you get a lot of people say it's the bloody woke left again. But this isn't a left-wing idea. It's a pretty rational, I mean, not to say that the left aren't rational, because we're on the left, but it's not a left-wing ideal to say maybe the police should just do their job properly and just, bring the assailant under control. But that's it. By the way, the person was led down with his arms by his side. It wasn't like he was under threat at that point. But again, it's not a left-wing position. It is what we like to think all of us as a society agreed upon when we built these systems. So it's not a left-wing thing, is it?
No, not all. But these are the same people who, I think it was Lee Anderson who also said he'd love to see the cane brought back in schools. These are the same people who would love to see the death sentence come back too. Well, even though very famously the last man in this country who was sentenced to death was ultimately innocent. It's just all this ridiculous, just far right rhetoric where they want to live in a brutal society where the systems aren't fair. And they think that just pain should be an inherent thing involved in a society to somehow keep it in order. When in actual fact, we've progressed so much as a society in a positive way because we've moved away from those systems. And if you want to go look at some countries who do enforce those systems, then go and live there. Go and see how happy you would be when the police are completely brutal towards you when you're there, because it does happen. I've seen it happen in some of these countries that I've been to. You don't want to live in a state like that.
We'll move on. Let's talk about water. Now, Labour won't end the disastrous privatisation, despite the fact that the majority of people support public ownership, and they're now celebrating private investment. But we've got to pay for it. I mean, we were told that this government is going to lower bills, and they lied. Privatisation, look, it's something you cannot fix. There's no other solution than nationalisation. So I want to talk about this latest announcement from Steve Reid, as we covered at the beginning of the show. He's now happy that we've got £90 billion worth of private investment into our water. And obviously the idea is that there's so much money, it's going to be used to clean up all the shit that was, by the way, neglected because we have a privatised system. And it turns out how it's going to be paid for is us. They're going to use higher bills to pay for it, which is insane. And the fact that Steve Reid tweeted that with that in one of the newspaper clippings, he didn't even realise that, is insane to me. I mean, I want to get your take on all of this.
We are, I think, one of two countries, maybe one of three in the entire world who has privatized water and sewage. It's absolutely just ridiculous. If we want to talk about how to fund the water system without charging us, The Guardian reported in 2020, I think it was, that since 1991, since the companies were privatized, they've handed out £51 billion in dividends. That's just dividends. That's not bonuses either. That doesn't include the bonuses. So if we divide that up, that's about £3 billion a year. So it's 2024 now. So we're looking at about £70 billion since they got privatized. There's the money. There it is right there. And on top of that, because the system wouldn't have been for profit, we wouldn't have had people getting bonuses. We wouldn't have people having, like massive, big fat, CEO salaries and all of that. All of that money could have been going into the system. But now, because of those actions from decades past, we are ultimately, again, going to have to pay for it. And these companies are going to continue to have dividends. I think they mentioned right in the article that, they could be punished by not getting their bonuses and stuff like that. They will still get their dividends. They can't stop them from going out. They will still get those dividends, £3 billion a year. And again, we're going to continue to have to clean up the mess of past Tory governments from before I was born. It's just a joke. This country is a constant joke. The best thing to do over the long term would be to simply renationalise. We're doing it obviously with the trains by letting the contracts lapse. I don't know how it works. Is it just a straight buyback? Is there contracts that are going to lapse? I have no idea, but we have to do something. Obviously, I appreciate Keira's just come into power. Labour have come into power, right? If they say we can't afford it right now, I can accept that argument. But why not create an argument about we're going to take it back in the next 10 years? Because I'm sure there is a way to pay for it. Because right now, what's happening is that obviously the water bills are going to go up. We're still putting shit into the rivers. Another thing that's happened is that the price of bottled water is absolutely soared throughout the country because people obviously don't want to drink the tap water. So not only that, are people paying, the water bill might be what, 30, 40 pounds a month. People are now having to spend even more money by buying bottles of water, which, firstly, the logistics of bloody carrying water in trucks alone contributes so much to CO2, the amount that it takes to transport that, and on top of that, the amount of plastic as well. So it has so many secondary effects just because they're putting shit into our rivers, because they got nationalised, and now we're going to have to pay for it. And we're just going to continue to have to pay the cost for, I don't know, God knows how long.
But you listen to the Labour right, for example, and they've always said, well, nationalisation is ideological. And I know it's not just the Labour right. A lot of people, the mainstream pundits, the client journalists, the conservatives, they say it's ideological to support nationalisation. And particularly from the Blairites, they say, we don't want to use ideological policies. We just want to make things work for people. We want to improve lives for workers and everybody. Well, I tell you what, increasing bills, your water bills, is not improving your life, it's making it worse. But also, privatisation is ideological. It's never worked. We're seeing the worst of it today, and the only way to get out of this is nationalisation. And they like to talk about, well, it costs so much money to put things back into public ownership. How much is it costing us now? Now, the reason why there is shit in our waters, why it's so disgusting, is because private companies want to make a profit off of this public service. They don't give money just for nothing, right? They're going to want a return on investment. The problem with that is when you have a privatized system, like the railways famously, they are de-invested. And it comes to a point where they're not safe anymore because private companies are not incentivized to put the amount of investment needed. They're always going to take some sort of profit off of it. Now, the cost also comes onto the consumer, which is really funny when Steve Reed's like, well, we're gonna charge all these companies that do a bad job, which is, it kind of reminds me of Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she's like, I went to Wall Street and I told them to cut it out. You cannot change the behavior of these people because it's embedded into the profit motive on a monopolistic system like privatization. So this is never going to be fixed. And the fact that they don't even want to subsidize the costs to the taxpayer in terms of water bills, it means we're getting literally nothing for this. I don't care if there's going to be £100 billion worth of investment going into our water or our public services when we're footing the bill, even though we've been ripped off. And privatization, again, it's like paying for it twice. You're paying for the service to be run, then you're paying for the profit on top, and then when they eventually don't invest, there's a huge cash injection from the private sector, who then obviously push that costs onto people. How does this mean? Please tell me how the Labour Party are the grown-ups here when they're literally making people's lives worse by increasing the bills, whilst also keeping this very, very ideologically driven policy of privatisation in place.
Just want to shout out to Pancaking on in the comments because he called Steve Reed a div. Absolutely, as a person from Leeds, I absolutely love that word. So thank you very much. But yeah, the idea that it's ideological and it's not. It's just simply practical, right? The country would run better where our main systems are nationalised. And you know what? I'm not necessarily a capitalist, but the best that we can probably do with the system that we currently have is that we nationalise the systems in the country that we need, right? We have water, transportation, obviously things like education, health, all of these things, they can be fully under the control of the government, and then, regulated capitalism, because that's probably the best that we can hope for right now as a practical next step. I'm not talking about what I want for the entire future, but that could be a very easy practical next step. But we don't have that. It doesn't make any sense not to control an industry that is sufficient to human life within this country. It's ridiculous. And again, the cost is just being passed on to us. There are no grown-ups in the room. Again, if they want to make the argument that they can't afford it, just put it on the list for later. I can accept that argument. But again, it's also affecting other industries, because there have been tons of organizations out there who do holidays, activities on lakes and waters when it comes to the summertime. A lot of them haven't been able to function. It's actually I even saw a report a few weeks ago that's saying that it's making more people go abroad and spend their money abroad because they don't want to go and swim in our rivers and lakes in this country.
I certainly wouldn't swim in our rivers. And would it be nice to actually have a proper public sphere, which we don't really have? I mean, maybe people don't go abroad as much. Maybe they would like to have more holidays here and swim in our seas, but we don't want to do that because it's disgusting. And to sort of echo what we were talking about before at the beginning of the show of patriotism, there's nothing more patriotic than private companies, than CEOs who probably don't even live in this country, making money off of a human right in this country. Doesn't seem very patriotic at all. I think nationalisation is far more patriotic than anything else. But, I mean, going forward, there's nothing the Labour Party can really do. I mean, how are they going to deliver on the promises they say they will, which is improve lives to workers and to bring down bills? They're not doing that. They're going against that idea. Essentially, if you don't nationalize our industries, it's kicking the can down the road. And also to talk about cost, for example, right? I know obviously you say, oh, it's a lot of money. I would accept it maybe if they did it later down the line. I mean, I wouldn't even accept that, because you have to think of the costs that come embedded into the privatization of water, for example. If you have unclean water, people are going to get sick. And what happens there? People have to go to the doctors. They have to use our health service. So the multiplier effect from this is actually more expensive for the government. And also when you have pipes, for example, that aren't being upgraded, the infrastructure is just dying and withering away because private capital doesn't want to invest in it. That's another emergency expenditure the government has to do. So no one's willing to make that argument, it seems, in the mainstream, that actually, yes, we could spend a lump sum buying these people out, which, by the way, you ask me, we should nationalise without compensation. These people are crooks, they're criminals. But even if we had to compensate them, the cost is actually far cheaper than keeping what we have now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's okay. You're fine. You've won me over. Okay, I want it. I want it now. I don't want it later. I'm still on that side where I feel like, despite if they continue criticizing the government in power, the government of the day, I'm still kind of in that phase of we need to give them a time, see what they're doing. Some things that they've done have been okay. Obviously, over the last few weeks, we've been very unhappy about a lot of other things. But no, you're right. It should be something that's a priority right now. I actually know people who got sick from the water down there. Was it Devon when they went on holiday? Again, yeah, costing our NHS money. Really great point. That system is already being strangled as well. But almost tying it back into what we were saying a second ago about the idea of like people not wanting to go on holidays. Part of that as well is down to another form of nationalisation that we don't currently have, but it's going to be coming on the way, is the trains, right? People don't want to spend 300 quid on a train ticket from Leeds to Cornwall because it's just cheaper to go abroad. And people now, even more, don't want to spend any more money in this country because they can't go for a swim anywhere. They can't dip in a lake. They can't swim in a river. They can't go paddleboarding just in case they fall in and get some of that lovely bacteria up their nose that's going to make them sick. The country is just a mess, and it just doesn't seem like there's any practical plans to actually fix a lot of the things that should actually be a priority. And it's just going to continue this way because, the government have got a big black hole that's just appeared out of nowhere. And again, they're going to continue to prioritize other things. They're going to continue to prioritize being pro-business by not scaring off the private companies. Because again, if they went after the water industries too aggressively, it could scare. They could argue it's going to scare off other business. That's probably what they're scared of. Because if we went after those £3 billion a year on dividends that's been handed out to those people, if we actually dived into that company and was like, you can't give out dividends, other companies could be like, oh, they're telling us not to give out dividends to anyone, and that's going to scare off business. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's probably what's going through their
I could
pro-business
definitely wouldn't happen. If they want to go, there's the door.
Absolutely. But that's what they're scared of, probably, isn't it? Right? They don't want to upset the private sector by being too aggressive.
But it's also not. It's not extremely. It's not a left-wing position to have public ownership of utilities. It's something that we used to do. It's something a pretty.
It's something that everybody else does in the world as well.
It's a moderate social democratic thing to do. We used to have nationalized industries, and the majority of people support it. Even majority of conservative voters support it. I mean, people buy into the idea of competition in the capitalist system. Fine, when it comes to things that aren't a necessity, but when it's a monopoly power, you can't have competition. It's not how it works. So it's a real failure of, I would say, so-called progressive governments. It's a failure of Blair for taking on the Thatcherite agenda. It's a failure of Keir Starmer and his front bench to really challenge this basic thing that when a human needs, when we have resources that is a human right, essentially water, right? These, one, shouldn't be at the whims of profit making, but two, when it's a monopolistic service, it doesn't work anyway. This is what we end up with. And guess what? People predicted this decades ago. They knew it was going to happen, but they just allow it to happen anyway. Go on.
I was just going to quickly say one more thing as well, because it's this idea of, Thatcher's, privatization will create competition, the capitalist dream, right? It cannot work in many systems. It can't work in water. If anybody in the comment section right now, anybody want to ring me up, text me, tweet me, whatever, and tell me how I can change my water provider, because you can't. There is no competition. It's them or nothing. And today I got a train from London to Leeds. There's one train I can get on LNER, and there's two routes, but they both go the same way.
And how was your train journey, by the way?
Oh, wow, thank you for asking. Actually, 2 trains before mine got cancelled, so I had to sit on the floor for 2.5 hours because there was no space on the train because 2 of them got cancelled. But again, do you know what? In a beautiful capitalistic world, Curtis, because capitalism's the best, I could have just jumped on the competitor's train, right? No, because it doesn't exist. LNER have that one line. They own that line. Nobody else does that route. It's as simple as that from London to Leeds.
To use a personal anecdote here, I went travelling back in 2018 and I used the European train system. Absolutely fantastic. I remember I think I was going to Prague, and I had my own booth, right? Not just my own seat, my own booth. It was superb. It was on time. It was clean. It was cheap. And this is the non-utopian, not radical world we could have today.
I had the exact same experience. I was talking about this today while I was complaining about the trains with the people on the train. Is that I went interrailing when about 8-9 years ago.
Well, that's the same thing I did back in 2018. Yeah, it was 2018. It was interrailing. Yeah.
I was 2016, and a train from Amsterdam to Berlin. Lovely little booth to myself. No pre-reserved seat, just walked in, got this lovely little booth. The ticket was £30. It was a 6-hour train ride. Now, if somebody wants to tell me how long a 6-hour train ride can get you, I think from London to Edinburgh, it's about 5 hours. If I were to book that for next week, that would probably be anything from £100 to £300, depending on the demand. But right now, if you go on Trainline right now, go on your little app and search Amsterdam to Berlin for next week, it'll be around £30 to £40. It's absolutely insane that the difference in prices across Europe, because we pursued this route of privatization, which has not just completely failed, but it was just utterly absurd and it was never going to work.
I just want to address this absolute fucking danger, Stephen Paul. I've been seeing your comments, by the way, but you don't get banned for disagreeing. I don't know what you're on about. But what the fuck is this question about? Am I Hindu or Buddha? I mean, why would you ask that question? I'm actually an atheist. I don't believe in God. I'm not religious. I've never really been religious. But thank you for giving me these 2 options here. I wonder what it is. But yeah, I thought I would just bring that up. But that That is about the right time to wrap up, I guess.
I wonder what party you voted for, Curtis.
I wonder.
What party you voted for? Please tell us in the comments what party you voted for. Just to demonstrate.
Apparently, I'm Hindi. So we've got Stephen Ball, who was the religious investigator. I'm Hindi, even though you're supposed to say Hindu. I mean, not very good English there, is it? No, again, I'm not religious. I'm just
He's actually.
atheist.
He didn't want to go on holiday in the UK, so he's actually just a bit tanned. So he didn't want to swim in the dirty water, so he's been over to Spain for the last 2 weeks.
Anyway, thank you to everyone who tuned in, even our trolls. I mean, you're only helping the algorithm, so I really appreciate that. But it's fair play to you for getting out of your echo chamber and listen to a different point of view. So I will say I appreciate that. Now, I am away on holiday, so there won't be a show for some time, probably around 2 weeks. But if you do like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. Help us grow a socialist independent media. I'm Curtis Daly, and we will see you next time.